So hello, welcome back to the next class. Today we are going to start the topic compensation management. Since this topic of compensation is a huge topic, we are going to actually divide this compensation into three different classes. And all the topics that we are going to discuss throughout these three classes are mentioned here for your reference. And all the topics that we are going to discuss in today's class, that is the first part of compensation, are also mentioned here for your reference. Now let's get into the class. Before directly entering into today's class, let us understand what do we mean by compensation in simple terms. See, organizations do have objectives, goals, and they need human resource in order to fulfill those objectives and goals, right? Similarly, the employees, the human resource have the certain skills, knowledge, skills, capabilities, each and everything, which can help the organizations in order to fulfill their objectives and goals, right? So basically, it is like a give and take thing between the organization and the employees. Organization needs the knowledge, skills, capabilities, and all these things, and employees have all those things. Now these employees contribute their knowledge, skills, time, effort, each and everything in order to help the organization to fulfill their goals and objectives, right? Now these organizations, in return to all the offerings from the employees, in return give compensation. Okay, so basically in simple terms, compensation is all the financial and non-financial contributions that the organizations gives to the employees in return to the services that are offered by the employees to the organization. That is the basic thing that we have to understand before we directly enter into today's concept. See, this entire compensation part is like a theoretical part, and also before directly entering into today's theoretical part, let me tell you, see, there is an entire separate subject dedicated for this concept called as compensation management. We are not, we are not dealing with that entire, new subject of compensation management. Here we are only looking after the basics that are required for in this human resource management subject point of view. And also we also have certain laws guiding these compensation in our country. For example, we do have the minimum wages act, we do have the payment of wages act, we have workers compensation act, we have equal remuneration act, and recently we have this code on wages and all these things. So we are not going to deal with all those things today. We are only going to look after the basics relating to compensation, in related to human resource management subject. Okay, now let's get into the theory part, where we will be looking after each and every concept, each and every basic and fundamental in detail. So the next unit, compensation, the first class or the first part of this compensation. See, let's look at the basic definition of compensation first. See, compensation refers to the remuneration that an employee receives in return for his or her services to the organization. Now, let me tell you this thing. See, there are two terms, compensation and remuneration, and we use them normally interchangeably. Okay, but there is a slight difference between the terms compensation and remuneration. See, here, in all the subjects that we are going to deal with, we are basically referring to compensation, but actually you need to understand the difference between compensation and remuneration. Now what is the difference between compensation and remuneration? Basically, see, in organizations, employees receive financial, financial contributions and non-financial contributions from the organization, right? That means, all the things that the employee receives contain both financial and non-financial component, right? Now see, we are going to look after what do you mean by financial component, what do you mean by non-financial component, and all these things later. But in return to the services, provided by the employee to the organization pays him something. Now the all the things that the organizations pay towards the employees contain financial aspects, that means monetary aspects, and non-financial aspects, that is non-monetary aspects. Now compensation in general refers to the monetary part, whereas remuneration refers to the monetary part and the non-monetary part, that means the complete package. Okay, but what do we basically do is we interchange the terms compensation and remuneration. So see, that is why we have just started telling that compensation refers to the remuneration. That means, see, even though we will be telling compensation, we are actually referring to the remuneration. Okay, when you need to understand the difference between compensation and remuneration, because there is a chance that in certain interviews they will ask you telling that what do you mean by compensation, what do you mean by remuneration, then why are you using the term compensation everywhere instead of remuneration? So that is why we have included that in this definition, telling that compensation refers to the remuneration that the employee receives in return for his or her services to the organization. Okay, now compensation management is an integral part of human resource management and helps in motivating the employees and improving organizational effectiveness. Okay, now another basic point, although there is no basic difference between the term wages and salaries, Generally, now we are going to talk about the difference. See, we have looked after the difference between compensation and remuneration, right? Now let's look at the basic difference between wages and salary. See, all these things are basic concepts. That's why I told you this entire concept of compensation is a basic thing, theoretical thing. Now, generally, salary is used for compensation to white collar employees, while wages is used to denote the payment made to blue collar workers. Now, you also need to understand what do you mean by white collar employees and blue collar workers. Now, basically, to give you in simple terms, not exactly in simple terms, for simple understanding, blue collar workers are the workers who are basically assigned on floor, okay, on floor workers. Whereas, white collar employees are basically, superior roles or managerial roles and all these executive roles and all these things. Now, another difference is that salaries are paid on a monthly basis, whereas wages may be paid on hourly or daily basis. Okay, this is, all these things are general points that you need to know before you enter into an interview or before you enter into an organization. So till now we have looked after what do you mean by compensation, what is remuneration, what is the difference, what is salary, wages, and all these things. Right now, let's enter into what do you mean by compensation management. See, when we have discussed the earlier or basically initial parts of this entire subject, human resource management, what did we discuss? When we discussed the topic what do you mean by human resource management, what did we discuss? We basically told that human resource management means managing the human resource in an organization in an effective and efficient manner, right? Now similarly, we also had this topic called as performance management, and in the starting parts of that particular concept, we had a question telling that what do you mean by performance management. We told that performance management means managing the performance of the human resource in an organization in an effective and efficient manner. That means what we basically did here, see, for example, let's take performance management. See, what did we basically do in performance management when we stated the word performance management? See, when we tell performance management, that means we are basically telling that we are considering the organizational goals, and based on the entire organizational goals, we are preparing the goals for employees. That means we are basically setting the standards to the employees, and we are communicating the standards, performance standards, to the employees, and we are basically monitoring whether each and every employee is going according to their performance standards or not. And we are also trying to identify the gaps in the performance wherever and whenever possible, and we are also trying to deal with those gaps. Now basically in performance management we did all these things. Similarly, when we talk about compensation management, here we are talking about the entire management of the compensation within the organization. That means what are the different things that we do in order to manage the compensation in an organization. We basically learn all those things through this concept of compensation management. Like for example, formulating different plans relating to compensation in the organization, and monitoring all those plans, implementing all those plans. In this way, compensation management in simple terms means managing the compensation, managing the entire compensation part in an organization. Okay, that is the basic thing related to compensation management. See, whenever you get a term and you have a management, the word management attached to it, that means we are basically talking about managing that particular word. For example, human resource management, we are managing the human resource in an organization. Performance management, we are managing the performance of the human resource in an organization. Compensation management, we are basically talking about managing the compensation of the human resource in an organization. Okay, now see, compensation or reward management is concerned with the formulation and implementation of strategies and policies which are to reward people fairly, equitably, and consistently in accordance to their value to the organizations, and to help the organization to achieve its strategic goals. Okay, now compensation management is also known as wage and salary administration, remuneration management, or reward management. This you can basically expect as a bit in competitive examinations, telling that you'll be having a question telling that compensation management is also called as. Now you'll be having different options, out of which one of the option will be the one of these things, like wage and salary administration. You'll be having reward management or remuneration management and all these things. Now moving on, see, the next thing is difference between compensation and remuneration, which we have already discussed. Now the next thing is the importance of compensation and compensation management. That means what is the importance of this subject, compensation management, or the term compensation, or why do we need to learn this topic of compensation management, or where do we basically use this particular topic in reality in organizations and all these things. See, basically, while we were discussing the initial definition of compensation, we told that compensation is all the financial and non-financial aspects that the organization gives to its employees in return for the services that are rendered by the employees to the organization, right? So basically, from organization's point of view, compensation is basically giving for what it's getting in return. from employees point of view, or this particular compensation is something that they are getting for for their contributions and all these things. So we have to look from both the point of views. Okay, now see, compensation is one thing which has a very strong influence related to the employees contributions as well as the overall organizational objectives, because from organization's point of view it is a cost to them, right? From employees point of view it is the basic thing that they're expecting, in order to contribute something to the organization, right? So basically this compensation, this particular compensation topic is a very key important concept when we talk, not only this compensation, from the entire human resource management point of view. In organizations, compensation stands as a strong point. So there is a huge necessity that we have to manage this compensation in the organizations in an effective and efficient manner. Now what are the different things which state us or which tell us why we have to concentrate on this compensation? We will be reading all these things in the later topic, which is called as objectives and functions of compensation management. But we have to understand that, see, basically salaries or wages or whatever it is, the compensation or remuneration is the main thing why employees first, or basically not even employees, why people approach the organizations, right? Now you can tell that, see, is salary always the first priority of the people? Now see, once you reach a certain point in your career, salary may not be very important to you, but in most of the cases salary has a very strong influence on the employee's performance and all these things. Okay, so basically it is important for the organizations to basically concentrate on the balance between the cost that they are spending and the things that the employees are expecting. So in order to maintain that particular balance, we need to manage the compensation in these organizations in effective and efficient manner. Because see, if the salaries are too less, employees will leave. If the salaries are too high, and there is a chance that employees will leave. Now you may think that, why will employees leave if salaries are too much? For example, if you take a very basic job and if you start paying huge amounts to that particular job, at some point of time the employees may feel demotivated. There is this particular, there is this entire concept which relates that, if the salaries are too high, employees will get demotivated and all these things. We are not going to talk about that, but basically, see, what I'm trying to tell, that a balance should be maintained between the organization's givings and the employees takings. And in order to maintain that particular balance, we need to have this particular concept called as compensation management. That is the primary important. There are many more importance or many more things why we need to learn this particular concept of compensation management, which we will be learning in the later topics. Okay, but as of now, this is the major importance of this particular compensation and compensation management in organizations. Okay, now moving on to the next topic, now we are going to look after the objectives and functions of compensation management in organizations. Here also we will be looking after, or basically in this particular topic also you will be finding information related to what is the importance of compensation, what are the purposes of compensation, what is the contribution of this entire compensation management concept in the organizations. Now see, the objectives and functions of compensation management. See, compensation management's objective is to hire competent persons to ensure the internal and external equity concept. See, I'm again telling you, we have discussed this particular equity concept in the previous class. Here also we are going to talk, but we are not going to stress on this particular equity concept much, because we had a detailed explanation of this entire equity thing in the previous topic, which is job evaluation. If you want complete picture of this particular equity, please go back and watch the previous class, the last part. Now compensation management's objective is to hire competent persons to ensure the internal and external equity concept, to improve employee satisfaction, and to retain these valuable human resource or assets. The human resource management manager thus endeavors to take care of the below functions in managing the compensation, to develop the employee satisfaction and fulfill the employer's objective. This is just a basic point relating to objectives or functions of compensation management. It's like an extra point adding towards the concept of importance of compensation management. Now the main functions of compensation management are, so basically it may be either objectives or functions. They are basically four. Okay, four functions or objectives of compensation management in the organization. They are the equity function, the welfare function, the motivation function, and the retention function. That means basically this particular concept of compensation management has to serve, or basically is established to serve these objectives or these functions. And how many objectives or functions are there? Four. What are they? They are the equity function, they are the welfare function, they are the motivation function, and they are the retention function. Now, what do what basically do we refer when we tell that, equity function or, motivation function and all these things? We are going to look now. See, the first function that the compensation management has to serve, or the first function that, because of which the compensation management, this entire concept is established in organizations, is something called as the equity function. Now, what is the equity function? Since we have discussed in the previous class, let me give you a basic detail. Equity is nothing but it is the balance, the employee's perception of the balance between the work he is doing and the pay he is getting. That means, for example, if you are selling 100 mobiles, okay, now if you are getting 100 rupees as salary, now your perception, about the balance between this, the work that you are doing and the, the salary or wage that you are getting, your perception about the balance, your perception may either be, okay, I'm selling 100 mobiles but I'm getting only 100 rupees, or your perception can be, I'm selling only 100 mobiles but I'm getting 100 rupees. Now in this way your perception will be there, right? So basically your perception, the employee's perception about the balance between the work he is doing and the pay he is getting, is basically referred as equity. Now within this equity, there are different types of equity, telling that, we have external equity, we have internal, we have individual. In this way we will be having types of equity. We will not be talking about that in detail here because we have discussed in the previous class. So basically that is the basic, simple understanding of the term equity. Okay, that is basically the equity function. See, it is the first and foremost important function of compensation, which ensures that the employees are fairly paid and their worth is appropriately compared. This function ensures that more difficult jobs are paid more and that they are fairly compensated in comparison to similar jobs in the market. Okay, so the primary function, the first function of this compensation management is the equity function, where we need to, or basically where we concentrate on maintaining the balance between the work and the pay. That means we do so many different things, like ensuring, high level jobs are paid high, that means high work jobs are paid high, and low level jobs are paid low when compared to the high level jobs. And also, the compensations related to the jobs in the organization are in sync with the compensation to that particular jobs in the market. In this way we ensure equality, okay, between the work and the pay. That is the first function, equity function. The second function is the welfare function. Now this function is to take care of the psychological and the social need satisfaction. That means in welfare function, that means another function of this compensation management is to look after the welfare of the human resource in the organization. Now the employees worry about the family, and the liability should be reduced, and their self-esteem needs should be met to allow them to work without tension or unwanted stress. So another function of this entire compensation management is welfare function, where we concentrate on the welfare of the human resource in the organization, whereas, or which in turn will have the impact on their contribution or on their performance, because each and every employee in an organization will be having certain part of their mind involved in certain thoughts about certain welfare things, their future, their family, and all these things. So the organization uses this particular compensation compensation concept in order to try to empty that part of the mind which is continuously focusing on their these particular family tensions, family pressures in terms of welfare and all these things. So the organization will try to focus on that particular area, that particular welfare concept, using this compensation, so that it could remove any tension or stress that the human resource have, which is impacting or which may have the chance of impacting their performance. Okay, that is the second function, the welfare function. Now the third function is something called as motivation function. This is an easy thing. See, as we already discussed, compensation is a strong point in human resource management. That means in employees point of view, compensation is one of the strongest motivational factor. So the third function of this compensation management is something called as motivation function, where, see, the motivational function is to encourage an employee to take further challenges, perform better, and develop oneself for superior positions. Now this function therefore takes care of the career plans and training and development activities. That means, see, in simple terms, this entire concept is there, right? This entire functions, we are basically telling that compensation management in an organization is basically established in order to deal with these different functions. The first one is something called as equity function, the second one is something called as the welfare function, the third one is something called as the motivational function. That means this particular compensation management also functions in order to deal with the motivational part of human resource in the organization. And we already know compensation is one of the strongest motivational factor in an organization, for the human resource in an organization. So here we are telling that, see, this compensation management is established in the organization also to concentrate, or also to try to use this particular motivational thing in the employees. Now the fourth function is retention function. That means this entire concept of compensation management is also used for retaining the human resource in an organization. Now today human resource are being considered as a valuable asset to the organization, and because of the retaining and developing the knowledge bank, the retention of employees has become an important function of the compensation management. So basically these four are the major objectives or functions of the compensation management in an organization. That means the compensation management, the entire concept of compensation or compensation management in the organization has to fulfill these functions, or it is basically established in order to fulfill these functions or fulfill these objectives, or basically before establishing, or while establishing the compensation management concept into the organization, compensation concept into the organization, we have stated that, okay, see, we are establishing you, or we are bringing you in the organization, so you have to serve these purposes. That means these functions you have to fulfill, you have to deal with these objectives, these are your objectives. In this way, for the compensation or for the compensation management in the organization, these particular functions or objectives are assigned. So whenever someone asks you what are the different or basically what are the objectives or functions of compensation management in the organization, you have to basically state that, see, there are four different or four major or four main functions of the compensation management in the organization. They are the equity function, the motivational function, the retention function, and the welfare function. Okay, now so next let's move to the topic called as the principles governing the fixation of compensation. That means, in simple terms, in organizations there are certain principles that the organization has to keep in mind, or the organization has to follow while doing this wage fixation or salary fixation or compensation fixation and all these things. See, this is a theoretical concept. It is not important that you have to remember all the principles. Basically there are 12 principles, and it is not mandatory that you have to remember each and everything, but it is useful if you have a basic understanding of all these principles. Now let's move to the concept of compensation management, generally accepted principles governing the fixation of the compensation in organizations. Okay, see, the generally accepted principles governing fixation of compensation are as follows. See, don't think that the topic name is very complicated. It is just telling that there are certain principles that are followed in the organization while fixing the salaries or fixing the wages. Okay, now see, the first principle is there should be definite plan to ensure that the differences in pay for jobs are based upon variations in the job requirements, such as skills, effort, responsibility, working conditions, mental and physical requirements. That means the first principle states that, see, we have to ensure that there should be differences in the compensation based on the variations in the skills, the efforts required. It may be physical effort or mental effort and all these things. Based on the differences, the compensation also should be varied. We have to ensure that. That is the first principle. The second principle is the general level of wages and salaries should be reasonably in line with that prevailing in the labor market. That means, see, the basic salaries or wages that we are giving in the organization should be in line with the prevailing market rates. Okay, now the labor market criteria is most commonly used. The labor market basically refers to the market in basically having the labor, where we can draw in information regarding to what is the prevailing wage rates and what is the prevailing salaries and all these things. Now the third principle is the plan should carefully distinguish between jobs and employees. A job carries a certain wage rate, and a person is assigned to fill it at that particular rate. That means a particular salary is assigned to a particular job, and a person who is performing that particular job basically works for that rate that is fixed for that particular job. Now exceptions sometimes occur in very high level jobs, in which the job holder may make the job large or small depending upon his ability and contribution. That means here we are basically telling that, see, for example, in an organization, for the role of human resource manager, a particular salary is fixed. Now here we are telling that, see, in certain situations we must also consider that that particular person who is particularly assigned in order to perform that particular role may also have an impact on the compensation. Okay, now equal pay for equal work. That is, if two jobs have equally difficulty requirements, the pay should be same regardless of who fulfills them. Okay, now the next principle is An equitable practice should be adopted for the recognition of individual differences in ability and contribution. That means, see, in this particular principle, we are telling that, see, our particular principle, or basically our particular compensation must also, follow the principle that, for example, if an individual is contributing more to a particular job when compared to other individual, then the compensation must be flexible. That means, for example, if we both are sales guys and if I am selling more number of units when compared to you, then that particular, the more thing, the difference between our contributions must also have an impact on the compensation. That means I must be paid in accordance to my extra contribution that I'm putting in the job when compared to you in this particular example. In this way, this is also a principle that should be followed while, preparing the compensation plan, or, while wage fixation and all these things. That means, in simple terms, while fixing the wages, we must also, we must also include, or we must also consider the contributions of the individuals. Now, another principle is there should be a clearly established procedure for hearing and adjusting wage complaints. Okay. Now, this may be integrated with the regular grievance procedure if it exists. So basically, in this particular principle, we are telling that, see, you while wage fixation, you must also consider chances of establishing certain procedures which instruct the employees, what to do if there are any complaints relating to wages. Okay, that is also one principle that you have to follow, or you have to keep in your mind while wage fixation in the organization. Now, the next principle is the employees and the trade unions should be informed about the procedure used to establish wage rates. Every employee should be informed of his own position and of the wage and salary structure. That means each and every employee should be intimated, or basically he must be informed about his own salary, his own wages, how are they calculated, what are the cuttings, how much contributions, each and everything. That means he have to be aware, or he have to be informed, or he must be open to all the information relating to his wage and salary. Okay. Now, secrecy in wage matters should not be used as a cover up for haphazard and unreasonable wage program. That means, see, you cannot tell that, sorry, we cannot give the information about the cuttings in your salary because that is something called as pay secrecy. We are maintaining secrecy in pay according to our company's policy. You cannot tell that. Okay. So basically, an employee must be completely aware or completely informed about all his, wages, all his salaries and all these things. Now, the next principle is the wage should be sufficient to ensure for the worker and his family reasonable standard of living. Workers should receive a guaranteed minimum wage to protect them against the conditions beyond the control. So in this particular principle, we are telling that, see, you always have to follow the minimum wages. Okay. That means you must give the employees, or you must pay the employees at least bare minimum, amount for subsistence. Okay. Now, the next principle is the wage and salary structure should be flexible so that the changing conditions can be easily met. Okay, that means, the salary structures in the organizations must be flexible, so that whenever any change is necessary, you can, easily implement that. For example, if the government change the minimum wages, telling that from next month onwards, or, from whenever this particular act is, comes into force, the salary of each and every employee should be increased by 10,000. So your compensation plan, your wage fixation, your not wage fixation, your, compensation or remuneration plan in your organization should be flexible, that, even if any change is brought in, or even if any change is about to, about to be implemented, your wage plan should be flexible. That means it should be easy for you to adapt to those particular changes, Now, the next principle is prompt and correct payments of the dues of employees must be ensured, and arrears of payment should not accumulate. That means you also have to ensure that each and every payment are, basically is going on time without any arrears and accumulation. Now, the next principle that you have to keep in mind, while doing this wage fixation is, for the revision of wages, a wage committee should always be preferred to the individual judgment. That means, whenever we are talking about revision of wages, or, changes in the wages, instead of, only focusing on an individual's judgment, it is always better that we focus on a wage committee. Okay. Now, the last principle is the wage and salary payment must fulfill a wide variety of human needs, including the need for self-actualization. Now, it has been recognized that money is the only form of incentive which is wholly negotiable, appealing to the widest possible range of seekers. Monetary payments often act as a motivation and satisfies independently of other job factors. This is just a basic, general point. So these are the different principles These are basically the 12 principles, governing the wage fixation in an organization. That means, while doing the wage fixation or while planning to do the wage fixation in an organization, you have to, basically follow these general principles, or you have to keep these principles in your mind, and you have to, basically construct your wage fixation following or obeying or, complying with all these different principles. So we'll stop here, and basically in this particular, first part of compensation, we have basically looked after the introduction kind of thing to enter compensation, telling that, what do you mean by compensation, and what is the difference between compensation and remuneration, what do you mean by compensation management, and what is the importance of this particular compensation or compensation management in the organizations. And then we looked after the basic objectives or functions that have to be fulfilled by this, concept of compensation or compensation management, or in simple terms, we looked after the objectives and functions, or objectives or functions of compensation management. And then finally we moved on to the principles governing the wage fixation in an organization. That means the general principles, the 12 general principles that the organizations have to follow, or keep in mind while doing this wage fixation in the organization. So basically for this first part, we'll stop here. In the next part, we will be starting, with the topic of the different theories of compensation, okay, which is also an important topic when we talk about competitive examinations like UGC NET and all these things, okay. So we'll stop here. We'll continue in the next class. Thank you.